And about 50 feet away from us, a plane flew from our left to right, which would have been from Wheeler Field, which about 3/4 of a mile away, and it would be coming from that direction, Wheeler Field, flying away from it. The plane was a sickly green color. It had a large red circle on the fuselage, a pilot and a machine gunner. The canopy was back, fixed landing gear. We had no aircraft identification instructions, so it must have been either a Navy or a Marine plane. It certainly wasn't an Army plane. We went down to breakfast.
There was this one group of airplanes came right over Honolulu. They dropped down to about 25 feet, right in the channel here towards a battleship. And Stanley Bukowski, who was one of my buddies, he was out there. He says, "Oh, let's go over there and watch them drop the dummy torpedoes." So him and I went over there. I said, "Well, I got first call for colors." He said, "I got sound colors here in about a couple of minutes." He said, "Oh, we'll make it, don't worry." We said, "Let them drop the first torpedoes and then we'll sound general quarters and colors." So we went over there, and then there was 5 of them. 2 looked like they were headed for the Oklahoma, and 3 for the West Virginia. So when they dropped their torpedoes, and then the torpedoes hit, and they were about 25 feet above the water when they dropped the torpedoes, and then you could see the little wake coming towards the ship, and Stanley says, "Look now, watch them when they hit, they're going to go thump." That was the first mistake we made that morning. When those 3 torpedoes hit, it blew Stanley and I across the ship to the starboard side. We're 118 feet wide. We were covered with oil, didn't know what in the world to think. And Stanley says, "Them buggers are using live torpedoes, which are not supposed to." And then as they climbed, then we looked at the airplane. Then as they got over the ship, then we could see the 2 red balls, but we still didn't grasp they were Japanese. And finally, it could have been about a minute or 2 later, our first sergeant came up soaking wet because his office was on 3rd deck, see, on the port side. It blew him completely out of his office. And he come up there and says, "Get to your battle station." He says, "We're under attack by the Japs."
We could see the torpedo planes come up and peel off. You could reach out and touch them. We could see them in the planes, and the dive bombers were hitting us with strafing us. And of course, the high altitude is one that got us with the big bomb. So and everything was blowing up around us. The Oklahoma capsized. The West Virginia got hit bad, and it was just a bad day, and it was a mess.
We never saw them because they were high-altitude bombers. And all I remember is suddenly to see the whole front of the ship disappear. And then it was blank after that because we were picked up, spun around, dropped, and everything else. When we finally was able to get organized, and look back at the ship, there was nothing forward, all except black smoke, and we could see the superstructure leaning over.
When we were hit with that big bomb, we felt that it shook the whole ship. But that was before the explosion, see? And then when it went down in the bowels of the ship and exploded, and then the ship exploded, then we were caught in the ball of flame that went about 400 to 500 feet in the air.
I got around, got on one's tail. And what I didn't know was that I was in the middle of the line, not on the end, and I was getting some hits on my plane, but I was getting some from them on my plane, and right through the old canopy, and that's a good lesson that the war is two-way.
We looked around. It was still trying to get your thoughts together, because everything is happening at one time. So I said, "Oh God, my battle station." So then I made it up to the bridge. And then about that time, there was 2 more planes coming in, or there was 5. They come in groups of 5. 3 headed for the Oklahoma and 2 more for the West Virginia. And I was up on the bridge. This was right after 8 o'clock, about 5 after 8. And when they dropped their torpedoes, then they had to climb to clear the superstructure. They were only 25 feet off the water. from the water line to the top part of the superstructure is 16 stories high. So they had to climb like the devil to clear the ship. And I was up on the bridge at that time. This was around 5 after 8, I guess it was. And one of the pilots, of course they have their greenhouse back in case they crash, they can get out in a hurry. So he was looking back to see where the torpedoes was going to hit, and we made eye contact. And I remember him, I dreamt about him for 50 years. Almost every month, I'd see that same face, dropping that torpedo.
We had to crawl across the line to the Vestal after we were burnt to get off, which is about probably 40, 45 feet in the air and about 45, 50, 60, probably 60, 70 feet across the line. And we were burnt so bad, we just pulled us like big old long gloves and throwed it down and got on the line, and across the line we went. How we made it, I don't know. We had a lot of help from upstairs, I think.
What was the war all about? Well, we knew what the war was about because the Axis was a real threat to the Western world. We knew what we had to do. Pearl Harbor, of course, was a great motivator, I think, because the war came close to our shores, and there was a real threat to our very existence, and perhaps was the last war to be in that context. I think people of my vintage, so to speak, when they went into war, they knew what they were going for. I did. There was no question about it. And I feel that we all figured we had the job to do, and we better get in there and do it and get it over with. And the most difficult part, I think, was the wrenching displacement that took place all over the United States. People were taken out from their homes and so on, put in the army, shipped overseas. Most of us had never been over there before, so far away. You kind of go into a different world. You're living in you forget almost what home was like. We were across the Elbe River, actually, in a small town, and we were pinned down in this town. We couldn't move. We had moved into the edge of the town, but we couldn't get into the center. It's no fun fighting in a town. It's because although you have places where you can hide and so on, or to make any movement at all, you usually have to expose yourself in the street or where you're in a line of fire from the enemy. And it becomes very difficult because you can be in a room of a house and right in the next room will be the enemy. And you never know when a grenade will be tossed through a window or when an artillery shell will slam into you. And it's a very difficult fighting. It's not unlike fighting in a hedgerow, really, because again, I think the enemy has a little advantage in that when you try to move forward, he usually has a better line of sight, and the aggressor is always exposed. It's also difficult to move through a city lots of times because of the rubble that usually in difficult fighting, why there's been a tremendous bombardment of artillery, maybe bombs, and you're climbing over piles of bricks and things of that kind. So it's not a pleasant way to fight a war. And I got on the second floor of the house. We were cleaning out the houses, as we said. And I got on the second floor of this house, and in the room, it had been used by the Germans for a firing point, and there was a Panzerfaust. Now, a Panzerfaust is like a bazooka, except it's much smaller, and it has a big warhead on the front and a pipe that goes down like this. Fortunately, in England, I think it was, or someplace, maybe in Germany, we were told how to fire a Panzerfaust, and not very many were shown how to do this. But I saw this Panzerfaust, I looked out the window, and here was a machine gun emplacement with about 6 Germans in it. And somehow they heard me up on the second floor, and they started firing into the window and so on, and I hit the floor. Fortunately, the house had thick walls, and I stayed there for, I guess, half hour. But they didn't come into the house, and that was what I was worried about. Incidentally, I was all by myself. When the firing started, one of my sergeants, he got out of there, which he was supposed to do. But I was pinned down, and then finally I got up I saw this Panzerfaust, and I put it on the floor and I fired it, and the thing went right into the middle of the emplacement, and it knocked it out, along with half a dozen of the enemy. And with that, why we were able to move forward into the town. So that's the story.
And so we could just see a silhouette of these guys out there. They threw the grenades, and one came through. All I could think of to do was, because I couldn't reach the thing in time to throw it out, was to flatten out and put my foot up against it. So I did. I put my foot out in front of this thing, and it exploded. I think everybody was wounded in that process. I believe it was a concussion grenade, not a fragmentation grenade. And a concussion grenade bursts into jillions of little pieces, and everybody got some of that at that time. I don't think anyone overly serious, at least it wasn't my observation, but it was bedlam in the hole, of course, smoke and debris and in the air, and I don't know why the Japanese quit and went somewhere else at that time, or why they didn't follow up with their intention of trying to take the hole. But at any rate, they did not at that time. There was our own artillery landing on top of the hill. Probably, I don't think the Navy bombers were in on that. I think it was our own artillery. And at some point in that bedlam, the artillery fire and so on coming down, the one of the guys in the hole, Demuth, stuck his head out of the hole and got the side of his face blasted off by a bomb that landed close by. One of our own, I think. And came back in the hole, and there wasn't a lot we could do for him, except we tried to stem the tide, the bleeding, so on. And somewhere in this process, the sergeant got hit when he was in the entry of this hole, a little bit later, I think. I don't know how or what happened to him, except he died in that process. And we don't know I don't know, because what happened to him, except I think he was probably shot. I don't think it was grenades that got him. And with Demuth down and the sergeant out, and another guy with me, Batista, a little Mexican kid, fella, married, had, I don't know if he had any kids, but he was married. Yeah, and the sergeant, I don't think was. Demuth was young enough that he wasn't either. But at any rate, there was some action in the afternoon, some attempt to take this hole and do something about it, but it wasn't very, I didn't think, too strong. At one point, we fired out the blank side of our thing and got a fusillade of bullets back, so we know there was some action outside of the hole. But we were isolated. We were in this thing, and there was no way and no governing force trying to tell you what to do or not to do, except survival. And God knows survival is what the first thing that comes to your mind. You'd like to live through something like that if there's any way to do it. Well, somewhere around 6 o'clock at night, the Japanese started concentrating on this hole. And we were sitting, a little Mexican and I were sitting up against the wall, waiting for the next activity, and they dropped a grenade on him, and he threw it out. One came in here, and he threw it out. And he threw another one in beside him, and that went off. I was over here. Well, that killed him. That left me, and I think Demuth had passed on at that time too. So the next thing they did was squirt some gasoline in there. Squirted gasoline in the hole, a whole puddle of it, and I sat there and watched them do that, not thinking what the outcome would be. And then they threw in what I determined was a thermite grenade. I understood later that they burn at about 2,500 degrees, something like that. And that thing went off in this puddle of wire, and of course the whole damn place was on fire. So I said, well, I'm not going to sit in this and burn to death if I can help it. So I plunged for the opening of the thing, and they were on this other side. Went to the opening, and the sergeant was there, bent over in his spot. I hesitated just a second, and that damn fire seared my rear end up one end and down the other. So I had, that shot me out of the place. And with all the wounds I had at that time, I felt that what I needed to do was get to water. And that was my motive, was finding water. And I knew the Torquay River was down in front, so all of a sudden I decided I was going to do it. And so I turned on my side and I rolled down through the front of the hole and down the hill, through our barbed wire, ripped myself loose from that and kept on rolling down the hill as fast as I could get out of there. So I had to be mobile, whether I was wounded or not. I was still moving. And I thought the whole damn Japanese army was firing at me, but I don't think so. I think they were occupied with other problems, and maybe they thought it was one of their own anyway. But anyway, I went on down the hill and rolled on down to the Torquay River. I got down there and I laid in it, soaked it up, Then I began to worry that there'd be some Japanese around, so I went back into the jungle and sat there for a period of time, and finally went back to get more water.
We'd have to bed down at night in a foxhole, and you're tired of fighting all day, and you got to dig about foxhole. And you start digging, and you hit a rock, you can't dig anymore. You change place, and then you hit a big tree root, you can't dig in. Boy, sometimes you feel like, heck, I'm not going to dig. I'll just lay here behind this tree. Then the lieutenant will come around there and give you a heck. He says, hey, you better dig a hole. You can't lay on the ground like that. So we all try to find it, dig a foxholes. Spend the night in the foxhole. And we take turns. You're not on the front line every single day. One day, even the company, platoons take turn. One day, first platoon out front, and the other platoon is a reserve, like that. So I was in the third platoon, and the day we were up there on the front one day, well, here comes a brigadier general come up to the front line. He wanted us go faster. We want you to go forward faster, telling our officers. And we do all we can, but then not too far away from, that general must have been 40 feet away from where I was. And there was a German sniper hid on a tree up. And he took a shot at that general. I could see where he hit the ground, the dust flying there. And that's the last I seen of the general. He took off, and I haven't seen, he never did come back. And the next day, I was one of the volunteers, and me and another fellow, we can't get him down from here. We figured better go up there close and try to get close to their dugout. So we both gathered a helmet full of grenade from our buddies and crawled up there within 20, 25 foot, and we threw it in there, tossed grenades in there, but they were so well entrenched in that dugout, even if one fell in their holes, they must have had a lot of little zigzag tunnels in there. You won't get them. And I'm telling you, some of them had the nerve to get the grenade we threw and throw it back at us. Boy, it takes a lot of nerve to do that. So we tossed the grenade, and then I thought I'd better get up there a little closer, see if we could get him with a rifle. Now I crawled up to within maybe 15 foot or so from their dugout, and here I see this one of these German soldiers had a rifle just waiting for me. As soon as he seen it was real steep. As soon as my head popped over that crest, well, he fired at me. And I had my rifle, and I fired at him too, and it so happened there was a little piece of rock 4 or 5 inches in front of my head there. He hit the rock, and the bullet ricocheted, and then my helmet went flying off. Boy, I thought I was a gunner. And the lieutenant, he was watching from down below. I guess he told the other men, he says, there goes Akiyama. He thought I was a gunner. By golly, I wasn't even hit. I couldn't believe it.
We thought we had it made because they told us what was going to take place. The Navy, the Air Corps, the tanks. So we thought we had it made. Now, in the boat itself, the guys were seasick, some of them, especially in my boat off to the right front. A couple guys were sitting in the bottom. Everybody was anxious to get off that boat and fight. You know, we knew what our objective was. Our objective was to hit that beach, take Vierville, turn right, and go west and get to those ranges that went up Pont de Hoc, because they were only lightly armed and very little ammunition, because they had to climb up with ropes. So that was our job, to get down to them and rescue them. So everybody was anxious to get in. We didn't think we were going to make it because the boat was sinking. And it was due to the rough seas. And the British ships rode a little lower in the water due to some armor plate on the sides. So they took on more water than the LCVPs. And the bilge pumps couldn't control it. Now, we looked up at the sky. We saw the sky was black with our airplanes. And much of the time we yelled, "Give them hell," because we don't think we're going to make it. And we didn't think we were going to make it. We had 24 boats on their way for a rendezvous on Dorgreen sector, with its the most heavily fortified section of Omaha Beach. Plus, General Rommel put 4 rows of diabolical obstacles, all mined and barbed wired, and only visible at low tide. So the invasion had to take place at 6:30 a.m., which was low tide. So we had a 3-hour ride on these boats. Each boat was an army in itself, well armed. So we had good firepower to combat the firepower of the Germans. Hitler took his usual sleeping pill that night, fortunately. Didn't wake up till about 2 in the afternoon. General Rommel said no idiot would attack in this weather. And he went back to Germany for his wife's birthday, which was June 6th. What else did we have in firepower? We were assigned the Battleship Texas. And the Battleship Texas was going to open up on Dorgreen sector with its 16-inch guns at 5:55 to 6:25, a period of a half hour. Unfortunate. There were many unfortunate things. I didn't mention some of the unfortunate things. Eisenhower didn't know what troops were defending the beach because the pigeons that the French underground were going to send him the information with, the 2 pigeons were shot down by a German with a shotgun in the early part of May 44. So he didn't know that they had they had 250 elderly men of the 716th Wehrmacht Division. They were supposed to surrender rapidly, but Eisenhower didn't know that they put 200 young, well-equipped, well-disciplined men of the 352nd Grenadier Division in. And so we had 450 defending the bluffs at Vierville, which Eisenhower didn't know about. Now, the Battleship Texas, that was great. If they had hit their target, we'd be in good shape. But their shells went over the beach. That was another unfortunate thing. There was a whole series of unfortunates that took place. That's why the battle for Dorgreen Beach was called the Suicide Wave by William Giroux of the Times-Dispatch of Richmond. Anyway, they meant well. The Navy also had an LCI barge fitted out with 1,000 rockets. They were going to fire 4,000 5-inch rockets at Dorgreen sector right before the landing. Unfortunately, most of them, the range was off. Most of them landed harmlessly in the water. So that was 2 unfortunates there. Now, I want you to keep in mind of something else. I don't know if you know anything about the Pacific War with the Marines landing on Iwo Jima, Saipan. The Navy bombarded those beaches for 3 days, 2 to 3 days. The Battleship Texas and its squadron were only going to shell that beach for a half hour. The reason for that was the element of surprise. The Germans had 55 divisions, and we were landing with elements of 2 divisions on Omaha Beach. They could have thrown us into the English Channel very easily, especially if Hitler didn't take his sleeping pill. But anyway, what else did we have? We had 16 dual-drive amphibious tanks, Sherman tanks, that were going to come in on Door Green sector. And they had rubberized canvas sides, and they were going to, like they did in training, they were going to drop those rubberized sides when they floated in by boat. When they got on the beach, drop their aprons, and the Germans would be faced with 16 75 millimeter cannons and machine guns at point blank range. And they were going to support us, lead us off the beach. Unfortunately, 14 of the tanks drowned that were supposed to come in on Door Green. Only 2 tanks reached the beach before I landed, and one was immediately destroyed by German artillery. Another unfortunate thing. The Navy was going to do one more thing. They were sending in what was the future frogmen, the Navy battalion brigade engineers. And they were supposed to blow 2 paths through the obstacles. There were 4 rows of obstacles. Unfortunately, they got wounded and killed, so they only were partially successful. We could go in between whatever they blew. One other unfortunate, the Army Air Corps, as it was called, were going to drop 12,000 tons of bombs on Omaha Beach. Sounds great, doesn't it? Hiroshima had that kind of power, 12,000 tons. They promised us man-made foxholes when we got there. The bombardier had all this cloud cover. He was afraid to hit us coming in. So he delayed his drop for 3 seconds, 1001, 1002, 1003, dropped his bombs, and they landed 7 miles south of Vierville. They killed some Norman cows. So it was a series of unfortunate things. The last unfortunate was on Door Green sector. The beach was too narrow to land an entire battalion abreast of each other. So we were going to come in sequence. We couldn't even land 2 companies abreast of each other. So we were going to come in with our 24 boats in sequence, A, B, D, and C. Well, D got lost in the darkness and the rough seas. They landed 200 yards to the east. C got completely lost. They landed in the 1st Infantry Division sector, which was miles to the east. So only 2 companies were coming in on Door Green. Instead of 720 men to oppose the 450 on the bluff, we were coming in. 3 boats of Company A drowned. 29 men in 1 boat were salvaged. The radio man died. They took them back to England. They didn't get back to June 9th. 2 of the boats of Company B strayed. 1 way to the west, 1 way to the east. So 7 boats were coming in at each hour to attack Door Green sector. That's 210 men. When my little boat approached Door Green sector, the first thing that happened was the boat on our port side blew up. We were showered with wood, metal, and body parts from about 15 feet up. And of course, blood. When our ramp went down, the British sailors, they were kids. He was 17 years old. He wanted to get out of there. So they dropped us in neck-deep water. Now, I was 5'10". Neck-deep for me was okay. These fellas that were 5'2", 5'3", 5'4", they were ready to drown, especially with that heavy equipment. The life preserver was worthless. There's one downstairs on view. So anyway, they dropped our ramp. It was a signal for every machine gun on that beach to open up on our exit to that boat. Lieutenant Harold Donaldson of Texas, and I was landing with strangers because I was only with these guys 2 weeks, but I knew the lieutenant's name. I just visited his grave 2 weeks ago. He was machine gunned right away, never got out of the boat, and a few of the people around him were machine gunned, like they showed in Saving Private Ryan. Now, the fellow in front of me was Clarius Riggs of Tennessee, and he was anxious to get off that boat to kill Germans. He was machine gunned on the ramp. I dove in behind him, and only my helmet was creased by a bullet. And there I was standing in bloody, neck-deep water, my rifle over my head. But I must tell you one other thing. They issued these combat jackets. The Army never used these combat jackets again because they were difficult to get off, and the fellows drowned with them on. It pulled them down. I didn't wear it because my best buddy in the boat that I knew for 2 weeks, he made a watch band for me that's in the D-Day Museum, and his name is on the plaque that they have where my watch is. Robert Garbett Jr. of Newport News, Virginia. And he was an old man. He was 25 years old, and I was only 19. He said, "Hal, don't wear that jacket. It's liable to drown you." So I didn't wear it. Instead, I pulled one of my defiant acts. I wasn't planning to live through this. I rode home, get the telegram to my sister, because I'm not going to make it. I drew a big Star of David on my back of my field jacket with an Eversharp pen. You're probably too young to know what an Eversharp pen was. It was a $3 pen that I got as a gift from my sister. And you fill it up in an inkwell. I painted a big Star of David on my back as a sign of defiance. I printed the Bronx, New York underneath it. And that's where Spielberg got Brooklyn on the T-shirt, on the field jacket in the picture. He took it from my history in the museum in New Orleans. Anyway, we decided to get across that beach. We had to go in we were dropped at least 150 yards too far out because it was low tide, 6:30. So when we hit the dry sand, we started to run across it. Now, I landed on the right flank of Dahlgren sector, right on the border with Charlie Beach. The two tanks were here on my left. We ran past them. Now, I saw 13 fellas holding on to the backs of the tanks. I could picture the 7 and 6 guys. One of them turned out to be the only guy that lived in my boat team. He got behind the tank. His name was Charlie Connor of Charleston, West Virginia. So he lived through the day without getting wounded. He was the only fellow that lived out of my boat team of 30. But I'm digressing. We ran on the right side of the tanks. I didn't want to hide behind the tank because I figured, if you're going to hide in combat, it sort of made me feel like I'd be yellow. So I kept going in. Now, all of a sudden, we had a machine gun spray come from that bluff, the zigzag trenches, and it came from right to left. I heard a loud thud on my right side, and my rifle vibrated. Like, I don't know if you play baseball, you hit a ball sometimes, the bat vibrates. My gun vibrated. My M1, I turned it over. There was a clean hole through its receiver. The receiver is the part in front of the trigger. It's a little rectangular plaque. My 7 bullets in the magazine had saved my life. Another loud thud behind me on the left, and that soldier was gone. I hit the sand behind one of the hedgehogs. That's the most famous of the obstacles. They got them in the D-Day Museum. They used them in their advertisements. It's 3 iron rails welded together, cemented into the ground, and standing 5 foot high. Didn't offer much cover, but I hit the ground behind it, and I observed to my right, and Robert Ditmar of Fairfield, Connecticut, was lying on his back staring skyward, and he was yelling, I'm hit, Ma, Mother," silent. I looked over to my left, And the noise was horrendous on that beach. Sergeant Clarence Robeson of Lynchburg, Virginia, was staggering by me without his helmet, gaping hole in the left side of his forehead, his blonde hair streaked with blood. And I yelled for him to get down, but I'm sure he didn't hear me, and he was probably out of it. He staggered behind me, all the way behind me to the left, knelt down facing the wall, took out his rosary beads, and started praying. And that machine gunner in the zigzag trenches cut him in half. But I mean really cut him in half. You probably never saw anything like that. We had 85% casualties in the first 5 minutes.
On the morning of the 16th of December, about 5 a.m., a tremendous barrage took place up and down the entire 99th Division front. Hundreds and hundreds of German artillery guns began to fire in our positions. And the barrage lasted, I would say, 2 to 2.5 hours. And after that, everything was chaos for a while. Nobody knew whether there was going to be a big attack or whether this was just something the Germans were doing as a feint. Who knew? But we soon found out, because Camp Group Piper began to come through our area with his spearheads, and the 12th SS Panzer Division came through directly into our area. And so by the night of the 17th, the fighting had gotten so bad, and we had no tanks, we had no real artillery with us. We were strictly rifles against tanks, rifles and machine guns against tanks. And the battalion headquarters had a perimeter of machine guns out in front of it, and I've met some of the fellows that manned those machine guns and been to some reunions with them. But by the night of the 17th, our position, our line was very thin. We were holding a 25-mile line with one division, and it was a long ways between foxholes, and the position became untenable. And you can't fight tanks with rifles. And the Germans began to overrun our positions. So on the night of the 17th, we got orders to begin to move to the north up through Krinkelt and then to the rear up on Elsenborn Ridge and take up positions where we had high ground. It was strictly forest in the rest of the area where we had been. Well, how did I become a POW? Along toward midnight on the 17th, we began to move a convoy of our trucks and jeeps toward Krinkelt, and then we were going to head right up on Elsenborn Ridge from the town of Krinkelt. We got about halfway between the little village of Meringen to Krinkelt. I suppose it was probably 1.5 miles or 2 miles from Meringen to Krinkelt. We got about halfway there when our road came under heavy artillery fire. And the adjutant, Captain Engelmann, ordered all vehicles off the road and into muddy fields, where we immediately sunk down to our axles. Everything became immobilized. At that point, our officers got together and decided that they were going to get into jeeps and trucks and go on ahead. And they told the enlisted men, now you fellas here, stay here where you are. We're going to go ahead and see what's going on. We'll be back for you in the morning. Well, I was bogged down. I was driving the chaplain's jeep. The Catholic chaplain jumped out and went and joined other officers. And the jeep was bogged down completely in the mud. I had all the mail for the battalion. I had all the chaplain's equipment, the organ and songbooks and all the things that go with the chaplain's work. And as the barrage changed positions, I had to leave the jeep. It was getting too hot right there, and I went up on a slight hill and dug in. And I stayed there the rest of the night. And then on the morning of the 18th, as daylight approached, I saw a few other fellows moving around. They also had tried to dig in and just escape the barrage. So I went down and found about 20 guys, and we got together and we got a truck out of the mud. And we said, we don't know what's up ahead, except that we saw lots of fire and flame all night long in Krinkelt. The town was burning, and we didn't know whether it was occupied by the Germans or not. We did know that the town of Meiringen, right behind us, had not been occupied. So we decided to go back to Meiringen and see if any of our fellows were in there. And this was the fatal mistake, because unknown to us, the Germans had quietly moved into Meiringen about 4 a.m. So we went right into the center of town, and then all of a sudden they opened up on us. And we piled out of the truck, and some of the fellows scattered into different houses, and some of us went into basements. And we held off as best we could for a while. And then the Germans brought up a tank, and they pointed a tank barrel into our basement and began to yell, come out, and hand hocked and so on. Well, when you're looking down the barrel of a tank and it's only about 8 or 9 feet from you, you don't have much choice when you have nothing but a pistol or a rifle with you. We had no choice. So it was come out or be all killed with one blast. So we came out.
Our battalion moved into Besançon. We crossed, we followed a road up to almost just a short distance from railroad tracks. Now the railroads in the town were dug down into a deep ravine so that they could pass through the town without having any problem with the rail traffic. All they had to do is have a bridge over the railroad track. We stopped just short of this because we were coming under fire by 20-millimeter anti-aircraft, and infantry rifle troops were out ahead. So we established the command post in a building probably about 100 yards from the railroad tracks. So I laid the wire on the left-hand side of the road coming into town, so I felt that was the least amount of traffic. And then the CP was established on the right-hand side of the road in a house. So I climbed the roof to the roof of one house on the left and laid the wire over to the roof of our house where the command post was established. While I was there, hooking the wire up, getting ready to drop down off the roof, the Germans opened up on the roof with 20-millimeter anti-aircraft fire. And, of course, there was nothing for me to do but just jump off the roof. That seemed to impress the officers, and so they gave me a Silver Star for that. It was quite scary. During the night, we set up a defensive position in front of the command post. Now, this was behind a little stone wall about 3 feet high, and someone had strung some chicken wire above the wall up to another, maybe 6 feet or so, up to a total height of probably about 6 feet. So we were hunkered down behind the wall with our blankets wrapped around us and getting all set up for the night, waiting for anything that might come through. And pretty soon we became under attack by rifle fire and machine gun, and Germans started throwing grenades at us. They came up the railroad tracks and were clambering up out of there and approaching the command post. Several of the grenades just hit the wire and bounced off and landed outside, so they didn't do any harm. One of them somehow came through the wire and landed, and I thought it was somewhere at my feet, but I wasn't sure. So I leaned over, started groping around trying to find it, to throw it back. And I realized the time was up, so I just grabbed my blanket and shoved it up close to my chest and dropped, and the grenade went off. I didn't know anything then until I woke up later, all tangled up in a bicycle, which was sitting there, and everybody was gone. The command post was evacuated. Well, unknowns to me, they had gotten orders to pull back to a safer position because the Germans had infiltrated past the rifle companies and was surrounding the command post. So that I didn't know at the time. But I heard a sound inside the house, and I managed to get up and hobble over to the door, and Lieutenant Johnson was inside pulling the wire off the phone. I said, "Lieutenant, could you help me to the rear?" I said, "I think I'm kind of battered up." He said, "Well, just a minute. I got to take the wire off the phone first." So I leaned over his shoulder with blood dripping all over him, and I was bleeding from my temple and from left arm, and part of my right foot was shot away or knocked away with shrapnel, and we went back to the rear, and that a short time later found a Jeep and was evacuated to the aid station.
That's incredible. Why would you drop on a grenade like that?
I don't think there's any reason that I can say that I dropped on the grenade. That there was just nothing else to do. You can't get up and run. There isn't time. You can't throw it back. There isn't time. What else can you do? And it's partly a matter of survival. Maybe I might get lucky. And then partly, I don't know if I thought about anything at all. It was just instinct. I don't know if there was any concern about those around me or not. But I think instinctively you want to protect the ones that are around you too. Part of it is training. You got to react quick to a situation. Part of it, I think, is a lack of a mortal fear that if you're killed, what'll happen to you. Well, I didn't have to worry about that because I thought that my eternal life was being secured, and I felt that some of God's protection too, and it all worked out that way.